LeBron James, Kevin Durant, who most people think will go back to Golden State, but we'll see. Paul George and others all will have to make decisions on returning or finding a new team. What goes on behind the scenes for all that? Alex Kennedy, hoopshype.com, wrote a great piece about what happens. He talked to a bunch of NBA free agents to get an inside look on how they prepare for free agency and what happens during pitch meetings and how they come up with how much money they want to ask for. And he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Alex, what's happening, man?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
All is well. We've got free agency coming up. It seems like the crazy season in the NBA anymore, but there is a little bit of an art and a science to behind the scenes and what happens to all these things. And you kind of sat down with a bunch of free agents here. So give us a little insight on what some of these guys told you. I always find what's fascinating when these free agents get pitched. What are some of the things that happen in these meetings when you hear these two sides met for 7 hours? I mean, what could you be talking about for 7 hours? What happens in some of those meetings?
Yeah, well, they basically said, some organizations bring a ton of people. Some of them bring the owner, and that's typically really impressive to guys and their agent because if you bring the owner, it shows you're serious. You bring the boss. And I think typically what they're doing is just trying to not only, teach the person, here's what our franchise is about, here's our culture, here's our history. It's also showing you, here's how you fit into things, and here's our plan going forward. They did admit that typically with veteran players, the pitch meeting doesn't matter as much. They typically, especially if they've been through free agency before, typically they're just looking for, the best situation. They already have, an idea of each organization and what their situation is. But for younger players, especially first-time free agents, the pitch meetings seem to be very influential. That's what everyone kind of agreed on, that younger players and guys who are first-time free agents can really be swayed in those meetings. So I think there's, a lot of different techniques they use. Some of them use video presentations. Some of them have marketing brochures. Some of them bring, 15 people, including former stars from that organization. So there's a lot of different techniques they use, but I do think it's interesting because we don't really get to see, there's a lot of things that leak out and a lot of information we get. Sometimes the pitch meeting will leak out, but not very often. So I thought it was kind of cool to go behind the scenes there.
Yeah, in fact, we saw Paul George's, the pitch to him apparently leaked out from the Lakers the other day. Is that something that, I said, how does that leak out? Like, how does that get out to the public?
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I think that's usually we'll hear about a pitch meeting afterwards. We heard about Blake Griffin from the LA Clippers. We heard about what the Knicks did for LeBron in 2010. There have been some other players where it leaked out afterwards, but I think this one must have been, it seemed like they were trying to shop for a voiceover person, and someone who was in the running for the voiceover campaign or that job must have leaked out. Because the instructions for the voiceover were in there. So I think it has to be someone they were going to. But, yeah, I thought that was very interesting. The Lakers, they still had 2 days to change their pitch up, so they may have, changed it up and said, oh, that wasn't real. But it seemed pretty real to me.
Alex, I find it fascinating. We hear this story today that LeBron James texted Kevin Durant and all these things that happen before July 31st. How much does get done before July 31st when, you're not allowed to talk to these guys? That's tampering. But how much really happens?
Yeah, that was probably my favorite part of the article and probably the most informative part for me. I actually learned a lot when I wrote this article because I was talking to NBA agents for this section, and they were saying, look, you start talking to teams at the NBA draft combine in May. So they've been talking to teams and having conversations for 2 months basically, or, a month and a half whenever free agency starts. Every agent I talked to said that, yeah, things happen behind the scenes, conversations happen. Sometimes deals are agreed upon before free agency is even supposed to have begun. One agent said that he had a team text him the terms of an agreement before July 1st, and by texting it to him, he had evidence right there. He was like, I could have screenshotted it. He's like, obviously I wouldn't have, but, people are agreeing to deals before July 1. That's why, there's times where July 1, midnight strikes, and 2 minutes later, someone has a deal agreed to. So that does happen. Timothy Mozgov 2 summers ago signed a huge deal minutes after free agency began. And it's interesting to me, there are plenty of conversations like that do happen before July 1. So that's something to keep in mind too. Not only players talking, but GMs, agents, coaches, there's a lot of conversations happening.
I've heard like a lot of this starts around the All-Star break. Is that stuff that people have said to you, like when they're all at the All-Star game and there's such high-profile players that's when we were talking before you came on, Alex, like there's three of us here. If this was our last show and we got to pick where we were going to go afterwards, I think the three of us would probably say, hey, I'm going to this station, or I'm going to, like, these guys, do you think right now that these guys know where they are going to land and that they've known this going back to maybe the All-Star game or something like that?
I think a lot of players, especially the veterans, have a good idea of what they're going to do. They always say, I'm not thinking about it. I'm focused on the season at hand. And while they are focused on that, I think in the back of their mind, or even sometimes in the front of their mind, they are, thinking about it and having some conversation. You're absolutely right about the All-Star game. That's where a lot of recruiting takes place. Anytime, a lot of people are in the same city. So All-Star weekend, that's where, a lot of trade conversations used to happen because all the GMs and, league personnel were in the same place. It's where a lot of recruiting has happened because all the stars are in the same place. The draft combine, as I mentioned, the agents were bringing that up. That's because, again, all the GMs in the league and scouts and all that are in the same place. So you have a lot of information coming at you. You're gathering a lot of intel, having a lot of conversations. Whenever the entire league, whether it's players, executives, they're all in the same place, conversations happen. So I do think a lot of veterans, especially guys that have been through this before, that don't need those pitch meetings, they have a good idea what they're going to do.
Alex, how much free agency is about the agents, though, just serving as gatekeepers to their clients? Because we know, like with the Kawhi Leonard situation, for example, it's sort of been exasperated by his uncle serving as his representative. So how much is it the player to agent to team? How does that player-agent-team dynamic usually work?
Yeah, that's huge. There are a lot of agents that control the process. There are some that go out their way to say, look, I work for my client. It's not the other way around. But there are a lot of agents that feel they can force their guy to a certain team, or they can exclude certain teams from the market, even if they're interested. Some of the bigger name agents have been known to kind of do that over the years, where they'll start working on a player, in their free agency campaign, the year before, try to get a guy traded somewhere. And, those agents, I think you're seeing less and less of that now because players do want to feel like the boss and they do want to make their own decision. But I think that does still happen quite often. There was one agent I interviewed off the record for the piece, and he said flat out, look, there's 5 or 6 teams I won't deal with because I've been burned before. I can't trust them. They've leaked stuff. They've pulled offers from me. So whenever that happens, agents do have a lot of power.
So, Alex, how significant then is the agent's relationship with a player already on the team? For example, Ben Simmons and LeBron James, they have the same agent. Does that have any factor in getting a guy to sign?
Yeah, I really think it does. I think if you have a good relationship with the agent, if there's trust there, if they've done well by the agent, then I do think it helps their chances of landing a big-name guy because that agent is going to feel, they're going to be able to give a favorable pitch in the room about that team, whereas in some other situations they may bash the team. I know some agents have really wanted to get multiple stars on one team too, because it gives them power. It gives them the ability to push some of their minimum guys, some of their young players that go undrafted. They can push them to that team. We saw that with the New York Knicks whenever they had Amari Stoudemire. They brought in a lot of guys from Relativity Sports that were, Happy Walters clients. Yvonne Shumpert, Sean Williams. There was a lot of guys on that team. So it does give them some power, too, and they enjoy that.
Alex Kennedy wrote a great story at hoopshype.com about free agency, what happens in the pitch meetings, all dealing with agents and front office guys. What about the asking price? I mean, when we heard a couple of weeks ago that Trevor Ariza is going to be asking for $50, $60, $70 million, that maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, but how has that kind of started and set?
Yeah, so basically they look at free agents from the past 2 to 3 summers, and in the NBA it's kind of difficult because that 2016 offseason where the NBA TV money came in, that really skewed a lot of things and, led to some crazy deals with guys like, Luol Deng, Timothy Mozgov, a lot of deals that are trying to be traded now. They look at, recent free agents that have a similar skill set, similar production. They look at what those guys got, and then they try to average it out and say, okay, here's what my client contributed. Here's what he deserves based on these other, comparable players that hit free agency. And then they go to the team, and, they do take the team situation into consideration. Robert Covington, I actually used as an example because his agent talked to me for this section. He said, look, we compare him to guys like Kent Bazemore, Alan Crabb, Michael Gilchrist, and, the comp showed that he was worth $18.4 million per year. But they said we wouldn't be able to post these numbers on a winning team. The Sixers were bad when he did that, so they took $3 million off per year, and that's how they arrived on $15.5 million per year. So that's one example. They had 17 comps for him. He was near the top of the stats for each section, each stat. So that's how they arrived on their big extension.
Alex, a great piece, by the way, on hoopshype.com about this. Was there a science to who was okay with revealing themselves and who wanted to be Agent 12 or Agent 5? I mean, I guess up front you said right off the bat, like, do you want me to identify you, or would you rather prefer to stay anonymous? And why do you think some did and some didn't?
I think some of the independent agents that didn't have someone over them that was looking over their shoulder or checking to make sure they were talking to the media, they were able to go on the record. And some smaller agents, too, I think want some exposure. They want some attention from the piece to be able to say, look, here's how I do things. Here's how I help my client. So it made some sense for them to go on the record. Some of the big agents I talked to, they wanted to go off the record because either they could get in trouble because they're from a big agency, a big company, or they felt like, they had the exposure they needed, but they still wanted to help out and help the piece. So some of them, were doing it as a favor to me and just going off the record so they didn't get in trouble. Other ones were revealing a lot of candid information that could get them in trouble with the stuff about, what happens before July 1st, some different things they do with their client. So there were some things that was sensitive information too.
Alex, let's look at some of the examples now. LeBron James, okay, he's the biggest of big. How much of this applies to a guy like him?
I think with him, it's so different because he's already said he's not going to pitch meetings. He knows the entire landscape of the NBA. As you mentioned, he has every star's number, and he's already recruiting guys. I think he has a good idea of what's happening with Kawhi Leonard right now, what's happening with Kevin Durant. He knows about Chris Paul. They've already been talking quite a bit. Paul George is another guy that he has a relationship with, that he knows. That I think he has a good idea of where Paul George is leaning. LeBron's probably the guy that has the most information to make his decision in the NBA because he does talk to everyone. Rich Paul's very connected. I think he knows what he's going to do. He knows what each team has to offer from a cap standpoint, from a positional standpoint. He doesn't need to go in that room for 7 hours and hear a team pitch to him because he's been through that twice already. So I think his agent, Rich Paul, has done it even more. He's had these conversations with plenty of teams. So I think with him, some of it does still apply, but there's a lot of things with him. You don't need to come up with an asking price if you're LeBron James. You're getting the max. You don't need to I do think you're having conversations before July 1st, probably more than anybody. But the other stuff about asking price and all that's more for guys that are in the middle tier. And I think pitch meetings more and more are going to be for guys that are either, first-time free agents that are max players or, one agent said a guy like Trevor Ariza that has very similar options. Can he go to Houston? Can he go to Golden State? Can he go to Boston? He's going to want to hear from each team, whereas a guy like LeBron doesn't need that pitch as much.
Talking with Alex Kennedy, Paul George, he opts out, but that's kind of a formality. You get a guy like that, where he played in Indiana, he gets traded because the Pacers essentially say, look, we're going to try to get what we can. How much does the fact of you can make more money with the team you're with as opposed to going someplace else and maybe wanting to be in L.A., how is that factored in, do you think, for guys of that magnitude? You're Paul George. You can make more money if you stay in Oklahoma City, but you really want to be in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I think with guys that have been injured pretty seriously, they have that in the back of their minds, and that money can make a difference. There have been younger guys that, they feel like, oh, the money's going to come no matter what. I get signed a 2-year deal, just hit free agency again, and someone's going to give me a max contract. Or they've, been willing to bounce around the league. I think that's how guys like LeBron and Kevin Durant feel. They're thinking, okay, no matter what happens, I'm going to get a payday. Someone's going to take a chance on me, even if I have a horrible injury. But they haven't been through that yet. They haven't had that horrible injury where, you're worried about free agency and things like that. Paul George had such a gruesome, scary injury that he had to rehab from. So I do think that money is weighing in his mind. It is a significant difference. But again, you mentioned LA. It's not only is it very attractive because you want to go home and play by all your friends and family. You can make the argument now that LA has a young, up-and-coming team, whereas the Thunder, it's kind of difficult for them to put a contender around Paul George. They have Russell Westbrook, locked up, obviously, but, how is the fit really with George and Westbrook? Does Carmelo Anthony really make sense there for more than next season? Can they put multiple stars around him? Whereas you look at LA, and they have a wide-open championship window. They have all these young guys. LeBron's rumored to want to come there. I think it's really interesting. So he has probably the toughest decision. I could see him doing either, honestly. It's really tough right now to say.
Wild thing. And then, of course, you got the trade with Kawhi Leonard potentially, wherever they want to send him. What's your take on the future of Kawhi, and which teams are really in play for a guy his magnitude?
Well, I believe the Spurs only want to trade him to an Eastern Conference team or keep him. I think, like you said, with how his inner circle has kind of managed this, I do think the Spurs have some kind of belief that, look, he may still want to be here. Maybe we can salvage this relationship. And it's just his camp or his uncle that are in his ear saying, you should be somewhere else. But then on the other side of that, getting past how the medical team has, quote unquote, betrayed you, that's tough because, those fears are going to linger. So if it is true he doesn't want to stay in San Antonio, I could see teams like Boston and Philly being in the mix for him because they have the most assets.
There are some reports out there that the Sixers have offered trade packages. Let me ask you, Alex, at this stage of the game, would you be skeptical of giving up on Markelle Fultz?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to give up with guys when they're still so young. It's only been 1 year, and his trade value is so low right now. I think that's something you have to factor in, too. Look, the organization knows better than we do about, his injury, about his work ethic, how much potential he has to improve. So some teams do move a guy that early and say, look, it's only going to get worse from here, or his trade value is only going to drop more. But I don't believe that's the case with Fultz. He's still so young. So I think I would keep him. Obviously, if you can land a guy like Kawhi Leonard that's only 26 years old, and I think still going to be healthy and be one of the best players in the NBA, that's a bit different. But moving him for a draft pick or something like that, I wouldn't do that.
Okay, Alex Kennedy, hoopshype.com. Great piece, by the way. Follow him at Alex Kennedy NBA to find that piece. He talked to multiple agents, and they all gave their behind-the-scenes thoughts on how pitches happen, where they set the price, and all sorts of NBA free agent stuff. Alex, real quick, where do you believe LeBron will end up?
I believe he'll end up in Los Angeles. I think he wants to be a Laker. That kind of surprises me, honestly. That's more what I think he will do versus what he should do. To be honest, I'm not just saying this because I'm on your radio station. I said this on my podcast, too. I'm surprised Philadelphia is not being mentioned more for Paul George, for LeBron James. It seems like a really good fit. I think they're ready to win right now and compete in the Eastern Conference. I'm surprised Philly's not being mentioned more for these teams, but it just seems like they're, really interested in L.A. I don't know if they feel like, they could pull off a trade for Kawhi Leonard. Maybe it's because they think Kawhi's coming next summer, whenever he's a free agent. But it's surprising me that Philly's not being mentioned more, to be honest.
How about Kawhi? You think that they're being truthful when they say they don't want to send him to the West?
Yeah, I really do. With how the Spurs operate, I think, they don't want to send Kawhi to the team that he loves, and because it did end sort of messy. And I think with Kawhi, they also don't like the Lakers. They feel like the Lakers have all the advantages. They're a small market team. They've had to rise above that. They've had a rivalry with them. I do think they don't want to trade him there. And look, Kawhi could go there next summer, but I think they do want to ship him out east. And if you're a team like Boston or Philly, you can bring him in, potentially get to the finals, show him your culture, let him play around young players, and he may resign. So I think that's worth taking a risk on, depending on what you have to give up.
Alex Kennedy, hoopshype.com here on the Boardwalk on the hotline. Last one, Paul George, Oklahoma City, L.A., someplace else.
I'll say L.A. right now. I think maybe we could see LeBron and PG go to L.A., and then Kawhi go somewhere in the Eastern Conference. Maybe both those guys want him to join next season, but that's obviously far from now, so hard to say if that's going to happen. But I do think Paul George goes to the Lakers. This is probably the toughest one for me. I think he really is considering going back to the Thunder, and I could see him doing it. But I think if LeBron commits there, he's going to want to go join. That's my opinion.
All right, Alex Kennedy, everybody read that article at hoopshype.com. And he appeared, like all guests, via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Hey, Alex, thanks, man.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.